May 28, 1944. Dover, England, 11:47 p.m. Colonel Reeder stands on the white cliffs, binoculars pressed against his face, watching rubber tanks inflate in the moonlight below. 40 tons of steel, now 12 pounds of canvas and air. The hiss of compressed air mingles with the crash of waves against chalk. His hands tremble, not from cold, from the weight of what he knows. Across the channel, 22 miles away, German reconnaissance planes circle. Their cameras click. Their pilots report back, massive tank concentration, 1st U.S. Army Group, Patton commanding, invasion imminent at Pas de Calais. Every word, a lie, every image, a phantom, every tank, every truck, every soldier they see, inflatable, wooden, imaginary. And in 6 days, 150,000 real men will land 200 miles west at Normandy, while Hitler's best divisions wait for a ghost army that will never come. This is the story of the greatest magic trick in military history, the story of how rubber defeated steel, how artists became warriors, how lies saved 500,000 lives, Operation Fortitude, the deception that changed the war. And it started with one impossible idea. What if we could make Hitler see an army that didn't exist? January 15, 1944, Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, London. The room smells of cigarette smoke and tension. Eisenhower's fingers drum against the mahogany table, a tell his staff has learned to recognize. Bad news coming, or impossible decisions. Gentlemen, he says, his Kansas drawl cutting through the haze, we're going to invade France with the largest armada in human history. 5,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 150,000 men on the first day alone. He pauses, lets the numbers sink in. And the Germans are going to be looking the wrong way when we do it. The men around the table, generals who've commanded armies, admirals who've crossed oceans, intelligence officers who've broken codes, exchange glances. Colonel John Bevan, head of the London Controlling Section, leans forward. He's the one who's been working on this for 18 months. Operation Fortitude. From the Latin fortitudo, courage, strength, but also deception through strength. Sir, Bevan says, opening a leather portfolio, we're not just going to make them look the wrong way. We're going to make them see something that isn't there. He spreads photographs across the table, tanks, hundreds of them, landing craft, thousands, all clustered around Dover and the southeastern coast of England, the closest point to Pas de Calais, the narrowest part of the channel, the obvious invasion route. These don't exist, Bevan says flatly. Eisenhower picks up a photograph, studies it. The detail is extraordinary. Treads in the mud, camouflage netting, even the shadows fall correctly. Rubber, Bevan continues, inflatable tanks designed by set designers from Hollywood and Shepperton Studios. Sherman tanks that weigh 12 pounds can be carried by 4 men, inflated by bicycle pumps in 15 minutes. From the air, from 2,000 feet, perfect replicas. General Omar Bradley, who'll command the American ground forces at Normandy, whistles low. And the Germans will photograph them. They already are, Bevan confirms. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights 3 to 4 times weekly. We're letting them through. Scrambling fighters just late enough that they get away with the pictures, making it look like we're trying to hide something we can't quite hide. Air Marshal Arthur Tedder stubs out his cigarette. Psychology. If we made it too easy, they'd suspect. We let them work for it. Makes the intelligence feel earned. Trustworthy. Exactly, Bevan nods. But the rubber is only the beginning. He unveils the full scope. Operation Fortitude North will create a fictional British Fourth Army in Scotland, poised to invade Norway, tying down German divisions in Scandinavia. Fortitude South, the masterstroke, will conjure an entire phantom force, the first United States Army group, FUSAG, supposedly commanded by General George S. Patton, the German High Command's most feared Allied general. Patton, Eisenhower says, and something like a smile crosses his face. They think he's the best we have. Hitler's terrified of him, Bevan agrees. Every German intelligence assessment puts Patton at the top. They can't conceive of a major invasion without him leading it, so we give him to them, but in the wrong place. The plan is audacious. Fusag will appear to be a force of 50 divisions, over 1 million men, preparing to strike at Pas-de-Calais after the Germans have committed to defending Normandy. The real invasion will be the feint. The fake one will be the main event Hitler expects next. How do we sell it? Eisenhower asks. Every way possible, Bevins says. Fake radio traffic. We've got operators sending thousands of bogus messages daily. Double agents feeding false intelligence through channels we know the Germans trust. Dummy landing craft made of canvas and scaffolding, filling every harbor from Dover to Folkestone. Fake fuel depots, just painted canvas over empty frames, but from the air they look like millions of gallons. Inflatable aircraft on phantom airfields. Even phony newspaper reports about social events attended by officers of divisions that don't exist. Colonel David Strangeways, who runs tactical deception for Montgomery's forces, adds, "We're creating an entire ecosystem of lies. Each piece confirms the others. The Germans intercept a radio message about tank maintenance. Then their reconnaissance photos show those tanks. Then their spies, our double agents, report seeing Patton inspecting them. Then they intercept supply orders that match the force they think they're seeing. Every intelligence stream tells them the same story." And the beauty, Bevan continues, is that the lie is more logical than the truth. Pas-de-Calais is the shortest route, the closest to Germany, the most obvious target. We're asking them to believe what they already want to believe. Confirmation bias at the strategic level. Eisenhower stands, walks to the window. Below, London, still scarred from the Blitz, goes about its wartime business. Barrage balloons bob in the gray sky. Double-decker buses, their windows taped against blast, rumble past. "If this works," he says quietly, "we save tens of thousands of lives. The longer Hitler keeps his reserves at Pas-de-Calais, the more time we have to consolidate the beachhead at Normandy." "And if it doesn't?" Bradley asks. Eisenhower turns. His face is grave. "Then the bodies stack up on Omaha Beach until the channel runs red." The silence in the room is absolute. "Gentlemen," Eisenhower says, "make them believe in ghosts." February through May, 1944, southeastern England. They came from Broadway and Hollywood, from art schools and advertising agencies, men who'd painted movie sets and designed billboards, sculptors who'd worked in clay and plaster, sound engineers who'd created radio dramas, industrial designers who'd made refrigerators look modern and cars look fast. Now they wore army uniforms and built illusions that would kill. Arthur Shilstone had painted murals in Newark before the war. Now, at a requisitioned estate in Kent, he supervises the inflation of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops' latest acquisition, a 90-ton M4 Sherman tank that weighs less than a golden retriever. "Easy," he calls as 4 privates walk the rubber monstrosity into position. It wobbles, catches the wind, nearly takes flight. They guy it down with tent ropes, attach the air compressor. The tank, deflated it looks like an olive-drab tarp, begins to take shape. 15 minutes later, from 30 feet away, it's perfect. The gun barrel, the bogey wheels, even the welding seams show. From 2,000 feet, Shilstone tells his crew, a German photo analyst can't tell this from the real thing. They count rivets. We give them rivets. They measure shadows. We position these to cast the right shadows. They look for track marks. We drag real tank treads behind trucks to make the marks. Private Harold Dahl, a commercial photographer from Milwaukee, snaps reference photos. "The genius is in the mistakes," he says. "We don't make them too perfect. We let some camouflage netting drape wrong. We accidentally leave equipment visible. We park them slightly out of regulation spacing. Makes it look like a real unit that's trying to hide but can't quite manage it." By March, they've created entire tank battalions, 400 rubber Shermans, 300 inflatable trucks, 85 dummy landing craft, scaffolding and canvas that look like LCTs from the air, moored in harbors where German reconnaissance can photograph them. But the visual deception is only half the illusion. April 1944, Signals Intelligence Unit, Dover Castle. In rooms carved into the white cliffs, radio operators create an army out of electromagnetic waves. Sergeant Jack Morton adjusts his headset. His orders are specific. Simulate the radio traffic of the 6th Armored Division. He's never seen the 6th Armored, doesn't need to. He has their communication patterns, their schedule, their codes. Baker 1-4 to Baker 1-6, he transmits. Require maintenance support. 3 vehicles, coordinates follow. 30 miles away, another operator, part of the same phantom network, responds, confirming the request. They're talking to each other, but the Germans monitoring Allied frequencies hear what sounds like a real armored division coordinating operations. 23 operators working in shifts generate the electronic signature of an entire army group. Thousands of messages daily, requisitions for fuel, requests for maintenance, weather reports, medical supply orders. Complaints about rations, queries about leave schedules. The key, explains Captain Frederick Fox, who designed the system, is volume and banality. Real military radio traffic is 99% routine, boring, administrative. If we only sent dramatic messages, they'd suspect. Instead, we bury them in the everyday tedium of military bureaucracy. They track the German response meticulously. Luftwaffe reconnaissance increases over Dover in southeastern England, decreases over the actual invasion staging areas in Portsmouth, Southampton, and Plymouth. The Germans are looking where Fusag appears to be, looking away from where the real invasion force masses. We're writing their intelligence reports for them, Fox says with satisfaction. They intercept our traffic, analyze it, and conclude exactly what we want them to conclude. May 5th, 1944. Wentworth, England. General George S. Patton, arguably the most aggressive combat commander in the U.S. Army, is furious. "I'm commanding an army that doesn't exist," he snarls to his aide. "Phantom divisions, rubber tanks," while Bradley gets the real show at Normandy. His command of Fusag is Eisenhower's masterstroke. The Germans fear Patton above all other Allied generals. His aggressive tactics in Sicily and Italy have made him legendary in Wehrmacht intelligence reports. Hitler himself has said, "Where Patton goes, the main attack follows." So Patton becomes the centerpiece of the deception. He's photographed inspecting units in Kent. He gives speeches to his troops, actually actors and soldiers brought in for the occasion, then immediately return to their real units. He attends highly visible social events in London and Dover. German spies, actually double agents controlled by British intelligence, report his movements faithfully. Every appearance is designed to be noticed. Eisenhower keeps him visible, vocal, and apparently in command of the largest American force in Britain. Patton understands the strategic necessity, hates it anyway. "I'm a decoy," he tells his diary, "a very expensive, very loud decoy." But he plays his role with characteristic flair. When he visits the rubber tank parks, he demands they be arranged properly. He berates officers of non-existent units for imaginary deficiencies. He makes his performance so convincing that even some Allied personnel believe Fusag is real. The Germans eat it up. Their intelligence summaries consistently place Patton in southeastern England, commanding vast forces, preparing for the real invasion at Pas de Calais, May 1944. MI5 headquarters, London. The Kykes Committee, so named because the Roman numerals form a double cross, runs the most sensitive aspect of Operation Fortitude, the turned German spies. Every German agent in Britain has been captured, turned, or executed. Not most, not nearly all, every single one. The Germans don't know this. They believe their spy network in Britain is intact and productive. Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo by British intelligence, is the star of this shadow war. A Spaniard who offered his services to the British in 1941, he created an entirely fictional spy network of 27 subagents across Britain, all imaginary, all reporting through him to the Abwehr in Madrid. The Abwehr, German military intelligence, trusts Garbo completely. They've awarded him the Iron Cross. They pay him regularly. They consider him their most valuable asset in Britain, and every word he sends them is crafted by British intelligence. In the months before D-Day, Garbo's network reports, Agent 33, reports large concentration of armor east of Dover, at least 30 divisions, American insignia. General Patton observed inspecting troops May 3rd. Agent 7-4 observed floating piers being constructed at Folkestone, clear indication of invasion preparation. Estimate departure possible mid-June. Agent 4-1 reports intense air activity southeast England. P-47 fighter groups rotating into forward airfields, pattern consistent with pre-invasion air superiority operations. Each report is carefully timed. Each contains accurate but tactically useless information mixed with crucial deceptions. The Abwehr analysts in Berlin cross-reference Garbo's reports with Luftwaffe reconnaissance photos, radio intercepts, and other intelligence sources. Everything confirms everything else. The massive army group in southeastern England. Patton's command. The focus on Pas-de-Calais. We're inside their decision-making cycle, explains Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Robertson, Garbo's handler. They receive our information. They analyze it. It matches their other intelligence. They brief their commanders. Those commanders make decisions based on false data. By the time they realize the deception, it's too late to respond. The beauty of the system is its reinforcement. The fake radio traffic validates Garbo's reports. Garbo's reports give context to the reconnaissance photos. The photos confirm the radio traffic. Each element of the deception makes the others more credible. We're not asking them to believe one big lie, Robertson says. We're building a structure of hundreds of small truths that add up to a massive falsehood, like a coral reef. Each polyp deposits a tiny bit of calcium. Over time, you get something enormous and seemingly natural. June 1st, 1944. Berchtesgaden, Germany. Adolf Hitler studies the intelligence summaries in his mountain retreat. The maps show what he expects to see, the massive Allied force arrayed opposite Pas-de-Calais. They'll come at the narrowest point, he tells Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West. It's the logical choice. Shortest route to the Ruhr, Patton commanding, their best general against our strongest defenses. Von Rundstedt, a professional soldier who's fought since World War I, is less certain. My Führer, we have reports of activity in Normandy as well. Perhaps a feint, Hitler interrupts, to draw our reserves away from the main attack. We'll not fall for such an obvious trick. This is the Germans' central analytical error. Their intelligence is actually quite good. They know about Allied preparations in Portsmouth and Southampton. They've identified many of the actual invasion units, but they interpret this real intelligence through the prism of the deception. Normandy becomes the feint. Pas-de-Calais remains the main objective. Hitler reinforces the 15th Army at Pas-de-Calais, 19 divisions, including panzer divisions with Tiger tanks, the best armor in the German arsenal, nearly 200,000 men, all positioned to counter the invasion that will never come. Meanwhile, the actual invasion force, massing in southern England, faces lighter defenses at Normandy. The Germans have troops there, certainly, but not the reserves, not the armor, not the concentration of force that could stop the invasion at the waterline. Eisenhower has created a situation where German strength becomes German weakness. Every division at Pas-de-Calais is a division not at Normandy. Every tank, every gun, every soldier watching the wrong stretch of coast. June 6, 1944, 12:30 a.m., Normandy coast. The sky fills with parachutes. 13,000 American paratroopers from the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions drop into darkness behind Utah Beach. Many miss their drop zones. Some drown in flooded fields. Others land in trees, in villages, in the middle of German positions. But they're there, behind the Atlantic Wall. Real soldiers, not rubber phantoms. At 5:50 a.m., the naval bombardment begins. 7 battleships, 18 cruisers, 43 destroyers, their guns roaring in sequence, shaking the earth, pulverizing German positions with thousands of tons of high explosive. At 6:30 a.m., the first landing craft hit the beaches, Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, Sword. And in Berchtesgaden at 10 a.m., Hitler finally wakes. His aides have let him sleep. The early reports are confused. An attack at Normandy, yes. But the scale is unclear. Perhaps a raid, perhaps a diversion. Hitler reviews the intelligence. still trusts the Fusag narrative, still expects the main attack at Pas de Calais. "We wait," he orders. Patton hasn't moved yet. When Fusag attacks at Calais, that will be the real invasion. The 15th Army, Hitler's reserve, his Sunday punch, the armored fist that could have shattered the beachhead, remains at Pas de Calais, waiting for ghosts. By the time Hitler realizes his error, by the time he orders the 15th Army to move toward Normandy, it's June 8th, 2 days after the invasion. The Allies have 300,000 men ashore. The beachhead is consolidating. Fighter bombers rule the skies, making daylight movement suicidal for German armor. The 15th Army's panzers crawl toward Normandy through devastated roads under constant air attack. They arrive piecemeal, battalion by battalion, to be thrown into battle as they appear rather than as a coordinated counterattack force. The window has closed. The chance to drive the Allies back into the sea is gone. Operation Fortitude has worked beyond anyone's wildest expectations. June 6, 1944, 3:47 p.m., Omaha Beach. Corporal James Ramirez of the 29th Infantry Division huddles behind an anti-tank obstacle. The beach is chaos, bodies in the surf, burning landing craft, the cliff face above swarming with German machine gun positions. He doesn't know about Operation Fortitude, has never heard of Fusag or rubber tanks or double agents. He knows only that the beach is hell and men are dying, and somehow, impossibly, they have to get off this beach and up that cliff. What he doesn't know, what he can't know, crouching in blood-stained sand, is that the plan worked, that the German reserves are 40 miles away, waiting for a phantom army, that the panzers that could have thrown them back into the sea are positioned to stop an invasion that will never come. This moment, this nightmare, is the proof of Operation Fortitude's success. If the deception had failed, if the 15th Army had been waiting at Normandy, if the panzer divisions had counterattacked on D-Day itself, the beach would have been worse than hell. It would have been a slaughterhouse. Not 2,500 American casualties on Omaha. Perhaps 10,000, 20,000. But Ramirez doesn't think about this. He thinks about the cliff, about the men beside him, about putting one foot in front of the other despite the terror screaming in his mind. He runs, falls, gets up, runs again, reaches the seawall, somehow alive. Behind him, the beach continues to fill with men and equipment, the most massive invasion in human history, succeeding because the enemy was looking the wrong way, succeeding because somewhere in England, rubber tanks cast shadows in the sun. June 7th. July 15th, 1944. Here's what's remarkable. Operation Fortitude doesn't end on D-Day. For 40 more days, the Allies maintain the fiction of Fusag. Garbo sends increasingly urgent messages to Madrid about Patton's forces preparing for the real invasion at Pas de Calais. The rubber tanks remain in Kent. The fake radio traffic continues, and the Germans continue to believe. On June 9th, 3 days after D-Day, Garbo transmits what will later be considered one of the most important messages of the war. Urgent. Have received reports from all agents. The Normandy landings are confirmed as diversionary. Fusag preparing for main assault Pas de Calais region, ES toward June 20th at 25. Patton's forces still in southeastern England. Recommend maintain defensive positions Calais sector at all cost. The Abwehr forwards this to German High Command. They forward it to Hitler. He reads it and nods. "I knew it," he says. "Normandy is the diversion. We hold at Calais." The 15th Army stays put for 6 more weeks. This is the achievement that turns D-Day from a successful landing into a strategic triumph. The initial beachhead is fragile. If the Germans had thrown everything at Normandy immediately, they might have contained it, turned it into a bloody stalemate, another Anzio. Instead, they hold back. Wait for the real invasion. Give Eisenhower time to build up forces, expand the beachhead, break out into France. By the time Hitler finally accepts that Normandy was the invasion, by the time he commits his reserves, the Allies are already racing toward Paris. July 20th, 1944. London. The Yiksex Committee holds its final meeting on Operation Fortitude. The deception is winding down. Garbo will send one more message claiming Fusag has been reorganized for operations in France rather than a cross-channel attack. Plausible? A way to retire the fiction gracefully. Gentlemen, says Colonel Bevan, I believe we can conclude that the operation was successful. Understatement of the century. The post-operation analysis will take months. But the basic facts are undeniable. German forces at Pas-de-Calais on June 6th, 19th Divisions, approximately 200,000 men. These forces remained in position for 6 or 7 weeks after D-Day Allied casualties in Normandy, while heavy were 30–50% lower than worst-case projections. The beachhead consolidated without a major German counterattack in the critical first 48 hours. The breakout from Normandy succeeded in part because German reserves arrived too late and too disorganized. Military historians will later estimate that Operation Fortitude saved between 50,000 and 100,000 Allied lives by keeping German reserves out of the battle during the critical period. 50,000 lives, saved by rubber and radio waves, by artists who became warriors, by double agents who became triple agents, by the audacious idea that you could make an enemy see what isn't there. June 1944, various locations. But there's a darker side to Operation Fortitude that's rarely discussed. Thousands of Allied soldiers fought and died at Normandy without knowing why the beach wasn't worse, why the panzers didn't counterattack on D-Day, why they survived when by all logic they should have been annihilated. They fought thinking they'd lucked out, or that German intelligence had failed, or that God had blessed them. They couldn't be told the truth, couldn't know that somewhere in England artists were deflating rubber tanks, that in London MI5 handlers were congratulating double agents, that the intelligence failure was actually an intelligence triumph. The men who ran Operation Fortitude carried a strange burden. They knew exactly how many lives their deception saved, but could never tell the men whose lives were saved. Sergeant Morton, the radio operator who'd simulated an armored division's communications, watched newsreels of Omaha Beach in a London cinema, saw the bodies in the surf, the men struggling up the bluffs, the desperate, costly victory. He thought, if Fusag had failed, if they'd been waiting at Normandy. He didn't finish the thought. Couldn't. The alternative was too terrible. He went back to his radio room, sent more phantom messages, maintained the illusion for 6 more weeks, never told anyone what he did until the Official Secrets Act released him decades later. 1975, United States. The first official acknowledgments of Operation Fortitude begin to emerge. The rubber tanks, the double agents, the scope of the deception. Corporal Ramirez, now James Ramirez Sr., a 53-year-old grandfather in Texas, reads about it in Time magazine. He sits in his living room, the magazine trembling in his hands. He was there, on Omaha, in the first wave. He'd watched friends die, had nightmares for 30 years about the beach, the bodies, the machine guns. And now he learns. It could have been worse. So much worse, if the rubber tanks had deflated at the wrong time, if Garbo's messages had been doubted, if Hitler had trusted his instincts instead of his intelligence, if any one of 100 small deceptions had failed, he might not have survived Omaha Beach. His children might never have been born. His grandchildren might be abstractions, possibilities that never materialized. His life, his entire existence beyond June 6, 1944, hangs on the thread of a deception he never knew was happening. Dad? His daughter finds him in the living room, tears streaming down his face. Are you okay? I'm alive, he says. I'm alive because of rubber tanks. She doesn't understand. How could she? He barely understands himself. But he knows this. Somewhere in England in 1944, men he never met saved his life by making Hitler see ghosts. 2025 Military History Symposium, West Point. The lecturer displays a photograph, a rubber Sherman tank, partially deflated, looking surreal and somehow sad, like a balloon at a party 3 days after everyone's gone home. Operation Fortitude, she says, represents the apex of military deception. It succeeded because it understood a fundamental truth about human psychology. We see what we expect to see. We believe what makes sense. We trust patterns that confirm our assumptions. The cadets in the audience take notes. They're learning lessons that will be obsolete by the time they command troops. Modern warfare has satellites that can read license plates from orbit. Digital communications that are nearly impossible to fake at scale. Intelligence analysis assisted by artificial intelligence that can spot patterns humans miss. You can't fool satellites with rubber tanks. Or can you? The lecturer clicks to the next slide. It shows a modern military exercise, computer-generated units displayed on tactical screens, electronic warfare systems creating phantom signals, drone swarms coordinated to simulate larger formations. The tools change, she says. The principle remains. Deception isn't about technology. It's about psychology. About understanding how your enemy thinks, what they expect, what they fear, then giving them a version of reality that confirms their assumptions while hiding your actual intentions. She pauses, looks at the young faces before her. Operation Fortitude worked because Eisenhower understood Hitler, knew he feared Patton, knew he believed in the logic of the obvious invasion route, knew he would trust intelligence that confirmed what he already suspected. The rubber tanks weren't the weapon. Hitler's mind was the weapon. The Allies just pulled the trigger. A cadet raises her hand. Ma'am, if the deception was so perfect, why did the battle at Normandy still cost so many lives? The lecturer's expression softens. Because deception creates opportunities, not miracles. It saved tens of thousands of lives by keeping German reserves out of the battle. But it couldn't stop the machine guns on Omaha Beach. Couldn't prevent the hedgerow battles, couldn't make young men bulletproof. She clicks back to the image of the rubber tank. This is what fascinates me about Operation Fortitude. It's simultaneously the most sophisticated deception in military history, and a reminder that even perfect plans encounter the friction of reality. The rubber army fooled Hitler, but real soldiers still had to storm real beaches defended by real guns. The ghosts opened the door. Flesh and blood had to walk through it. In the decades after the war, the men who built the Ghost Army scattered to civilian life. Arthur Shillstone returned to painting murals, but never quite the same. He'd seen what art could do when turned to military purposes, had watched rubber shadows change the course of history. Sergeant Morton became a radio engineer, helped develop early television broadcast systems. Sometimes late at night in the studio, he'd remember the phantom messages he'd sent across the channel, the electromagnetic ghosts that saved real lives. Garbo Juan Pujol Garcia received honors from both Britain and Germany, the only person to receive the Iron Cross and the member of the Order of the British Empire for the same operation. He faked his own death in 1949, lived quietly in Venezuela until his story was declassified in the 1980s. Died in 1988. Honored as one of the great heroes of the war. General Patton got his real command, led the Third Army in one of the most aggressive campaigns in military history, proved he was every bit as dangerous as the Germans feared. Died in a car accident in December 1945, never knowing that his greatest contribution to victory might have been the army he didn't command. And the rubber tanks? Most were deflated, crated, shipped to storage facilities. A few ended up in military museums, curiosities from a war fought with weapons both high-tech and absurd. One sits in the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, partially inflated, sagging slightly. Children walk past it, giggling. It's fake, they say. Yes, that's exactly the point. It was fake, and it was perfect, and it saved the world. Final count, 150,000 Allied troops landed on D-Day, 50,000, 100,000 casualties, prevented by keeping German reserves at Pas-de-Calais, 23rd Headquarters, Special Troops. Approximately 1,100 men who created phantom armies, Operation Fortitude. Over 500 individuals involved in the deception rubber tanks produced. Approximately 400 inflatable trucks. Approximately 300 dummy landing craft. 85 German divisions tied up at Pas-de-Calais during critical period. 19 divisions, approximately 200,000 men, duration of deception maintained after D-Day, 40-plus days, cost of Operation Fortitude, estimated $2 to $3 million 1944 dollars, lives saved per dollar spent, approximately 20-30 lives per dollar. The rubber army that never fought a battle won one of the most important victories of World War II. Not with bullets, with belief, not with steel, with shadows, not with truth. With the perfect lie told to an enemy who needed to believe it. Eisenhower understood what Hitler didn't. In war, what your enemy thinks they see matters more than what's actually there. The greatest weapon isn't always the biggest gun. Sometimes it's just air and rubber, and the human need to see patterns where none exist. Sometimes winning means making your enemy fight the wrong battle in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sometimes victory looks like a deflated balloon lying in the mud, and sometimes the men who save the world do it with bicycle pumps and paint brushes, creating armies out of air, convincing tyrants to watch empty horizons while real soldiers storm real beaches and begin the liberation of a continent. That's the story of Operation Fortitude, the ghost army that won the real war, the rubber tanks that defeated steel, the greatest magic trick in military history. And it all started with one impossible question. What if we could make Hitler see an army that didn't exist? Answer, we'd save the world.